47 years ago, a young woman in Lubbock, Texas, stepped out of her own home and vanished, leaving behind a pot of chicken stew still simmering on the stove, a husband who cried at her vigil, and a best friend who sat beside him in the front pew. Within 14 months, that husband had married that best friend. Within 2 years, the case was closed. Within a decade, most of Lubbock had moved on. Her name was Darlene Voss, and she was 31 years old. Her family never moved on. Not once. And 47 years later, when a retired Texas Ranger sat down at his kitchen table in Abilene with a cold cup of coffee and a manila folder he had carried out of the department in a cardboard box, he found something inside a photograph that nobody had thought to look at twice. What he found in that photograph would change everything. But to understand how this ended, you have to understand who Darlene Voss was. And you have to understand what kind of town Lubbock was in the autumn of 1977, because that town is why it took so long. Lubbock in October of 1977 was cotton country. The fields ran flat and wide in every direction, and when the harvest was in, the air carried the faint, dusty sweetness of it all the way into town. On Saturday mornings, the parking lot at the First Baptist Church on Avenue Q filled up an hour before services, not because anyone was pious in a showy way, but because people genuinely wanted to be around each other. Neighbors dropped casseroles on porches without being asked. Kids rode bikes down the center of neighborhood streets without a parent's worry. It was the kind of place where the hardware store owner knew your father's name, where the same families had lived on the same blocks for 2 and 3 generations, and where an unlocked door at midnight was not carelessness, it was trust. Darlene Voss had grown up in that trust. She had been born in Lubbock, graduated from Coronado High School, married her high school sweetheart, Ray Voss, in June of 1968, and had spent the next 9 years building the life she had always pictured. She worked 3 mornings a week as a bookkeeper at a local agricultural supply firm, a job she had taken to help put Ray through his contracting license examinations. She sang alto in the choir. She kept a vegetable garden behind the house on Frankfort Avenue, tomatoes, squash, 3 kinds of peppers, and she gave away more of what she grew than she kept. Her closest friend in the world was a woman named Connie Aldridge, whom she had known since the 7th grade. They had been in each other's weddings. They talked on the phone every Sunday evening without fail. Darlene had one habit her family remembered above all others. She kept a handwritten list on the refrigerator door of every person she owed a kindness to. When she did something for someone on that list, she crossed it off. She called it her ledger. She said she never wanted to owe the world more than she gave it. That was the last normal morning that anyone remembers her well, a Tuesday in late October, standing at that refrigerator, adding a name to the ledger before she left for work. That was the last time her mother saw her whole. She never arrived at the office. At 9:15 that morning, her supervisor, a man named Gerald Hooper, called the house on Frankfort Avenue when Darlene's desk sat empty through the 8:30 arrival time. Ray Voss answered the phone. He said she had left the house at 7:50. He said she had been fine. He said she was probably stuck behind a school bus. He hung up. At 11:30, Gerald called again. No answer. At 2 in the afternoon, Gerald drove to Frankfort Avenue himself. He found the pot of chicken stew still on the stove, burner off, lid on, everything prepared but untouched. He found Darlene's purse on the kitchen counter. He found her car in the driveway. He called the Lubbock Police Department at 2:14 p.m. on Tuesday, October 18, 1977. Ray Voss told police he had last seen Darlene at approximately 7:45 that morning. She had been making the stew for a church potluck that Thursday. She had kissed him on the cheek. She had gone back to the kitchen to check the burner. That was it. Ray said he had gone to a job site in Slatton, 40-some miles east of Lubbock, and he had workers there who could confirm he had been present all morning. The workers confirmed it. Police noted the confirmation. They noted the pot on the stove. They noted that nothing in the house appeared disturbed. They noted that Darlene's purse and car were there. But they also noted, and this appeared in the original case file with very little weight attached to it, that her winter coat was missing. A tan wool coat, mid-length. Missing from the hook beside the back door. One of the first investigators on the scene, Detective Paul Garza of the Lubbock PD, wrote in his notes, "Subject may have left voluntarily. Coat taken. No sign of disturbance." He was 27 years old and had been on the detective unit for 8 months. He meant well. He was wrong. And that conclusion, barely 2 pages into a manila folder, would sit unopened for the better part of 5 decades. The search lasted 11 days. Volunteers walked the fields east of the city. Deputies checked the bus depot. Flyers went up in every window on 34th Street. Darlene's mother, Evelyn Pratt, a woman who had survived the death of a husband and a drought year and a flood year, and still maintained she had never asked for much, sat in the Lubbock County Sheriff's waiting room for 3 consecutive days until someone finally walked her out to the parking lot and told her that without evidence of a crime, there was only so much they could do. Connie Aldridge, Darlene's best friend, organized a candlelight vigil at the church on the 2nd Friday of November. She sat in the front pew beside Ray Voss. Ray cried. Connie held his hand. The pastor spoke about faith. By December, the official investigation had produced no leads, no body, no evidence of violence, no evidence of a departure. Darlene Voss was simply gone, and Detective Garza's 2-page notation had established the tone. She may have left. It was the easiest explanation. It was also the one that let everyone go home. By February of 1979, 14 months after Darlene disappeared, Ray Voss married Connie Aldridge in a small ceremony at the same church. Darlene's mother was not invited. When Evelyn Pratt heard about the wedding from a neighbor, not from Ray, not from Connie, from a neighbor, she sat at her kitchen table and didn't move for 2 hours. She called her pastor. She called her son, Darlene's younger brother Terry, who lived in Amarillo. And then she did the one thing she had decided she would never stop doing. She called the Lubbock Police Department and asked about her daughter's case. The officer on duty that afternoon told her, politely, that it remained open. He said they would be in touch. They were not in touch. The years have a way of burying things in a place like Lubbock. The cotton came in every fall. The families moved. New developments went up on the south side of the city. Detective Garza moved to a supervisory role and then retired. Ray and Connie Voss settled into a life that, by all outward appearances, was a quiet and ordinary one. Ray's contracting business did well. They attended church. They kept to themselves. Connie never spoke publicly about Darlene, not once, not in any account that anyone has since been able to find. But Evelyn Pratt did not bury it. By 1984, 7 years had passed. Evelyn had developed a habit that her son Terry would describe decades later as both heartbreaking and heroic. Every 6 months, she sent a typed letter to the Lubbock Police Department. 1 page, polite, specific. She listed her daughter's name, her case number, her last known date, and she asked, in formal language, whether any new evidence had come to light. She sent 32 of those letters before she died. She received 11 responses, most of them form letters. None of them contained new information. By 1991, 14 years after Darlene disappeared, the house on Frankfurt Avenue had been sold twice. The vegetable garden was a concrete patio now. The First Baptist Church had been remodeled. Lubbock had grown. Darlene's case had never been formally closed, but in every practical sense, it had been filed away in the part of the department's history where old mysteries go to wait. Terry Pratt, now living in Lubbock himself, had taken over his mother's letter-writing campaign after Evelyn passed in 1993. He was methodical about it. He kept a binder. He wrote the dates of every letter and every response in columns on a yellow legal pad. He had no legal training and no investigative experience. He was a plumber, but he had a photograph of his sister on his refrigerator, and he said he could not explain to himself how to stop. If any case on this channel demonstrates what it means for a family to refuse to be defeated by silence, it is this one. If you want us to keep uncovering stories like Darlene's, real people whose cases deserve more than a form letter, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment, letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes this possible. Now, let's get back to Darlene. The break came in the spring of 2021. It did not come from a new tip. It did not come from a confession. It came from a retired Texas Ranger named Dale Whitfield, who had spent 31 years investigating cold cases across the Panhandle region and who, in the first weeks of his retirement, had made a decision that his wife later called absolutely like him. He took a box of unsolved files home from his last day of work because he said he couldn't leave without them. Whitfield had come across Darlene's case not through any official channel, but through a genealogy forum online. One of those communities where amateur investigators exchange notes on cold cases and family history. A woman on the forum, who had spent years trying to locate a distant relative, had posted about a Texas woman who vanished in 1977 and whose husband had remarried her best friend within the year. She had found a digitized scan of a 1978 Lubbock newspaper clipping in a public library archive. She posted the clipping. Whitfield saw it. He requested the physical case file from the Lubbock Police Department under a records disclosure request. It arrived in a brown envelope 6 weeks later. 83 pages. He spread them out on his kitchen table. He went through them methodically, the way he had been going through case files for 3 decades. And on page 41, he found a photograph. It was a Polaroid, faded to amber at the edges, taken by the first officers at the scene on the afternoon of October 18, 1977. It showed the back door of the house on Frankfort Avenue, the door beside which Darlene's tan wool coat had hung. The coat was gone from the hook, but in the corner of the photograph, on the floor below the hook, there was something small and dark that had never been identified in any document in the file. Whitfield stared at it. He ordered an enhanced digital scan of the photograph from a forensic imaging service. When the scan came back, what had appeared to be a shadow resolved into something unmistakable. A button. A single button, torn from the coat at the buttonhole, lying on the linoleum below the hook. A button that suggested the coat had not been taken voluntarily. A button that suggested the coat had been pulled. He picked up the phone and called the Lubbock Police Department's cold case unit, which had been established in 2011. The detective who took his call that morning was a woman named Sergeant Renita Flores. She listened to Whitfield describe the photograph for 11 minutes without interrupting him. Then she said, quietly, "We need to see that scan." She already had a copy of the file. She had never looked at page 41. What followed over the next 19 months was an investigation that Sergeant Flores would later describe in a deposition as the most careful work her unit had ever done, because the principal suspect had lived openly in the Lubbock community for 43 years, and there could be no error. Ray Voss was 80 years old by the time Flores and her unit opened the active investigation. He and Connie had retired to a house in southwest Lubbock. He still attended church. He still knew people. He had grandchildren. He had, by every external appearance, lived the life of a man who had simply suffered a tragedy and rebuilt. But the investigation now moved in directions that the original 1977 inquiry had never approached. Flores obtained warrants for Ray's financial records from 1977. She found that in the 10 days following Darlene's disappearance, Ray had made 2 cash withdrawals from a joint account, amounts small enough not to attract attention at the time, but consistent with what investigators described in court documents as expenditure for transport. She tracked the Slatton job site through county permit records and located one of the surviving workers, now in his 70s, living in Odessa. He told investigators that Ray had been at the site that morning, but that he had arrived late, not at 7:50, as Ray had told police. He had arrived closer to 9:30. The discrepancy had never been explored in 1977 because nobody had asked. Flores requested that Connie Voss, now Connie Aldridge Voss, still living in the house, be brought in for a voluntary interview. Connie declined through an attorney. That was the moment, Flores later said, that confirmed the direction. Innocent people don't get lawyers for voluntary interviews about a 50-year-old missing person case. It was the DINA that closed it. Ground-penetrating radar scans of a property that Ray Voss had owned through a holding company. A 2-acre lot on the eastern edge of Lubbock County that he had purchased in November of 1977, 1 month after Darlene disappeared, and sold in 1982. Detected an anomaly at 4 feet. Investigators obtained a warrant and excavated. What they found in June of 2022, on a Wednesday afternoon when the temperature in Lubbock was 96 degrees, confirmed what Evelyn Pratt had believed from the first moment. Her daughter had never left. The remains were sent to the Texas Department of Public Safety Forensic Lab in Austin. They were confirmed as Darlene Ann Voss through mitochondrial DINA comparison with a sample provided by Terry Pratt. She had been there for 45 years. Ray Voss was arrested on a Saturday morning in September of 2022 at the house in southwest Lubbock. 2 patrol vehicles and 1 unmarked unit from the Cold Case Division pulled into his driveway at 7:15 a.m. A neighbor across the street was watering her garden. She stopped. She watched. Ray Voss came to the door in a blue bathrobe. He was read his rights on his own front porch, in full view of a neighborhood that had known him for decades. Connie Voss stood in the hallway behind him, and by accounts of the officers present, she did not speak. She did not reach for him. She simply stood there. The neighborhood did not rally to his defense. The church did not issue a statement of support. The people who had known Ray Voss for 40 years went very quiet. A woman who had attended the same congregation told a local television station, "We thought we knew him. Apparently, we only knew who he showed us." The legal proceedings moved through the Lubbock County court system across the following 18 months. Ray Voss was charged with first-degree murder. He did not testify. His attorney argued that the forensic evidence was circumstantial, that the DINA established only the location of Darlene's remains and not the cause or manner of death. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 81. He will not be released. Connie Voss was granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for providing testimony about conversations she said had occurred in the weeks before Darlene disappeared. She has not spoken publicly since. Terry Pratt was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. He was 73 years old, a retired plumber from Lubbock, and he had been writing letters for 30 years. He sat in the second row, behind the prosecutor's table, and he held in his hands a photograph of Darlene. Not a formal photograph, not a school portrait, but a snapshot taken at some backyard occasion in the summer of 1975, 2 years before she disappeared. She is laughing at something outside the frame. She is wearing a yellow blouse and holding a glass of iced tea, and whatever is happening just off to the right of the camera has made her laugh with her whole face. That is the image Terry carried into the courtroom, and that is the image that stayed with him when the foreman said the word guilty, and that is the image that matters when everything else has been said. Darlene Voss loved tomatoes and church music and keeping her ledger even. She sang alto. She gave away more than she kept. She was 31 years old when someone she trusted took that from her, and then stood at her vigil and wept convincingly, and then married her best friend and built a respectable life on top of what he had done. Justice arrived 45 years late. But it arrived. There are things about this case that are worth sitting with. The original detective's notation, "may have left voluntarily," was not malicious. It was inexperience meeting the path of least resistance. And it shows how much weight a single wrong framing, written early, can carry across decades. The case file sat in a drawer because the first 2 pages gave everyone permission to leave it there. It was a retired ranger with a cardboard box and a genealogy forum and a faded Polaroid who finally read page 41. And it was a family, a mother who wrote 32 letters and a brother who wrote more, who refused to let the world bury Darlene's name along with her case. Record shows that Terry's final letter to the Lubbock Police Department, dated March 2021, arrived at the cold case unit 2 weeks before Dale Whitfield made his phone call. Sergeant Flores confirmed that Terry's letter had been placed in Darlene's file that same week. It was on the desk when she took Whitfield's call. What does it mean that the system finally worked only because a retired man in Abilene couldn't leave a box behind? What does it mean that the neighbors, the community, the church, that everyone who knew Ray Voss for 40 years never questioned him once? And what do you do with the knowledge that Darlene's best friend may have known, may have sat at that vigil, may have crossed the threshold of that church already knowing, and still said nothing for half a century? There are no easy answers. There rarely are in cases like this. But there is this. Darlene Voss's name is spoken clearly now. Her ledger, metaphorically speaking, has one more line crossed off. The world owed her more than it gave her. The world finally paid. Justice found Darlene Voss after 45 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe that truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, no matter how many form letters, no matter how many years, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. The links to more solved cold cases are waiting for you in the description. Thank you for being here.